50 years ago, the most cited sources in humanities and social sciences were a conglomeration of different ideologies from distinct intellectual backgrounds. Since the far left took over education, those sources have changed considerably. The estimate is that college administrators are 12 to 1, left to right politically. Many of these administrators are not moderate liberals, even if they claim to be. They are activists and radicals. Almost 3 decades later, in 2016 to 2017, Harry found that 60% of the faculty identified as either far left or liberal compared to just 12% being conservative or far right. Today, most of the sources come from a strain of thinking that originates in George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel and Karl Marx. Academics deny this as they continually rewrite history, the 1619 Project, Howard Zinn's A People's History, and cancel anyone who argued in favor of individual rights and capitalism, John Locke, Adam Smith, Thomas Jefferson. Marx and his followers have always advocated for collectivist rights, which are not a thing. Marx was heavily influenced by racists like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Hegel. Hegelian dialectics have racism fundamentally linked to their ideologies. Hegel certainly was an explicit racist. He believed, for example, that black Africans were a race of children that remain immersed in a state of naivete. He further wrote that indigenous peoples lived in a condition of savagery and unfreedom. Contrary to what some of Hegel's defenders say, it is the very abstraction of Hegel's racist ideas into a universal system of thought that is the problem because it hides these racist origins. To use dialectics without acknowledging this history runs the risk of carrying this racism unintentionally into our concepts, and thus into our beliefs and practices. Postmodernists such as Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, and Simone de Beauvoir make up much of the most prominent sources in the humanities and social sciences, yet we are told they no longer have a major influence. We are also told Marxism has no influence, even though postmodernist thought comes directly from Marx, and most postmodernists were Marxists in their youth, such as Foucault and de Beauvoir. Intellectuals, by the very nature of their professions, grant enormous attention to words and ideas. And they are attracted by socialist ideas. They find that the ideas of communism are praiseworthy and attractive, that, to them, is more important than the practice of communism. Now, Nazi ideals, on the other hand, were pure barbarism, nothing could be said in favor of them. Richard Pipes. The postmodernists wrote off their youthful naivete as an infatuation with vulgar Marxism, but their influential ideas are simply Marxism rebranded for a new century. Through their influence, far-left thought moved away from Marx's class consciousness to racial consciousness, critical race theory, and sexual consciousness, queer theory. Michel Foucault is the #1 most cited source in the humanities and a well-known Marxist pedophile. He is considered the godfather of queer theory, and he signed a petition to end age of consent laws in France in 1977. A few of his fellow faux intellectual postmodernists joined him, to include Gilles Deleuze, Jacques Derrida, Louis Aragon, Roland Barthes, Simone de Beauvoir, Jean-Paul Sartre, Félix Guattari, Michel Leiris, Alain Robbe-Grillet, Philippe Sollers, Jacques Rancière, Jean-François Lyotard, Francis Punge, and Bernard Bisseret. A few of these people are known pedophiles: Beauvoir, Sartre. Marxism is a Gnostic religion. We know that in their view, gaining the knowledge to better understand and atone for your false consciousness will help lead you towards their bullshit version of nirvana. Once enough of the citizenry has accomplished this, and the rest eliminated, society can finally reach the communist utopian ideal. Marx knew that to achieve this objective many groups would need to be eliminated, to include Slavs, Jews, blacks, natives, and many others who he deemed too primitive for salvation. Marx made many racist statements that would disgust the modern reader. Below is an excerpt from On the Jewish Question, a book that Adolf Hitler would use as inspiration for Mein Kampf. What is the worldly religion of the Jew? Huckstering. What is his worldly god? Money. Money is the jealous god of Israel, in face of which no other god may exist. Money degrades all the gods of man, and turns them into commodities. The bill of exchange is the real god of the Jew. His god is only an illusory bill of exchange. The chimerical nationality of the Jew is the nationality of the merchant, of the man of money in general. Marx also wrote this about Africans. It is now completely clear to me that he, as is proved by his cranial formation and his hair, descends from the Negroes who had joined Moses' exodus from Egypt, assuming that his mother or grandmother on the paternal side had not interbred with AN. Now this union of Judaism and Germanism with a basic Negro substance must produce a peculiar product. This is the guy pseudo-intellectual college professors hold up as the savior of the human race. The postmodernists will argue that Marxism is a completely different ideology. And when you are deep in the cult it might appear that way. However, we know that postmodernism comes directly from Marxist thought. Both groups view power as the basis of relationships and society. The postmodernists view themselves as superior because they have a more nuanced view than Marx. Marx believed in the class struggle and that one must realize their class consciousness to overcome it. The postmodernists believe in racial consciousness, sexual consciousness, fat consciousness, etc. Despite the realization by modern academics that the Hegel, Rousseau, Marx, and Engels were intrinsically racist, they refuse to acknowledge that modernist and postmodernism ideologies still carry the weight of that racism. Most of the major sources in the humanities and social sciences today are influenced by the counter-Enlightenment philosophers and not the Enlightenment. Enlightenment thinkers did not fully follow through with their beliefs, but they expressed the idea that human beings had similar moral foundations. The belief in liberty, individualism, and personal rights set the groundwork for a prosperous society in the West. Whereas Hegelian dialectics and Marxist classism separated people into groups, setting the groundwork for identity politics and the massive amounts of murder and genocide that took place in the 20th century. Modern academics choose to intellectualize and trivialize the atrocities of the 20th century. However, we can attempt to understand that once someone has paid tens of thousands of dollars for a useless degree, it is difficult to backtrack on your original belief system. Scholars over the past century have attempted to reinvent Marxism time and time again for every new generation. In some cases, even rewriting history and attempting to create some ridiculous sorts of race-based fan fiction. Here are a few of the major Marxists still prevalent in 20th century academia. There are dozens more not covered here. Michel Foucault. Foucault is the #1 most cited source in the humanities and a major source in the social sciences as well. Foucault spent most of his career as a Marxist. Foucault is the godfather of queer theory, an idea that focuses on the Marxist idea of establishing your consciousness, in this case, your sexual consciousness. Jacques Derrida. Derrida is the third most cited source in the humanities. He was one of the signatories of the petition to end age of consent laws in France. Many postmodernists believe childhood innocence is a social construct that must be dismantled. He was also clearly a Marxist. What could be more Marxist than blaming the two world wars and totalitarianism on the free market alone, let alone conveniently disregarding communist/Marxist totalitarianism? Derrida was even more explicit elsewhere. In an interview in Radical Philosophy, 1994, he said, "I have never gone along with these proclamations about the end of the great emancipatory and revolutionary discourses." Thomas Kuhn. Kuhn is the #1 most cited source in the social sciences, and he believed the scientific method was a social construct. One could cite countless examples in the writings of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky showing their profound interest in the scientific revolutions of their day. Kuhn wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions that has origins in the Marxist-Leninist concepts of scientific socialism and scientific revolution. Paulo Freire. Freire is the third most cited source in the social sciences. He was a Marxist that wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where he argued that it was a teacher's main objective to create activist students. Freire believed the classroom and everything else should be imbued with political narratives, something we see is quite common in the modern world. He celebrated Marxist-Leninism and the violent sociopath Che Guevara. As you might already know, Lenin wrote a book called In Defense of Terrorism and killed more than 4 million people during and after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Jean-Paul Sartre. Sartre was a Marxist pedophile who believed society was based around power. As a Marxist, he believed that societies were best understood as arenas of struggle between powerful and powerless groups. That is a clear homage to the Marxist class struggle. Simone de Beauvoir. Beauvoir is in the top 50 most cited sources in the humanities and social sciences for a book called The Second Sex. In this book, she argues women have always been treated as the subordinate sex. Marxism was an integral aspect of Beauvoir's political and theoretical orientation from the mid-1940s onwards, and it colors much of her writings. She was also a pedophile, are you noticing a trend, and just not a good person all around. The overarching issues here are more than a little significant. Marx is not the imagined boogeyman of academia, he is the architect of a slew of backward, anti-scientific, and faux intellectual thought. Marx is the counter-enlightenment, the antithesis to liberty, and the death knell of Western democracy. Although only 3% of college professors refer to themselves as Marxist, we have seen today that many more are heavily influenced by his thought. In fact, he is largely the main driver of the modern fields of humanities and social sciences. Imagine if creationists had a similar showing in the universities, would the country stand for it? Imagine, if you will, a university system full of pseudo-intellectuals who religiously or casually support a Marxist ideology that murdered more than 100 million people in the 20th century. That is not a place I would want to send America's youth.